in the world, but I'm sure there's a show in China that's bigger than Modern Family. But it's a very interesting moment when a scripted show that is, I would say, high-low, because Steve Levitan and Chris Lloyd create a huge amount of broad comedy there. But it's a real thinking show too. It delivers both high and low, and that's the #1 show. It's the first time a scripted show has knocked Idol and reality off the #1 slot in, I think, 9 years.
There we go. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Schneider. I'm the Los Angeles Bureau Chief of TV Guide magazine, and I'm up here talking to Mr. Paul Lee, the man behind that clip you just saw. So quite a year for you. First off, generally for networks, you get 1 or 2 shows to return. It's a good year. You managed to get at least 6 freshman show back next year. So how would you sort of describe this year? It was pretty good.
Yeah, we had a good year. I mean, I think it's always great when you have the opportunity to really swing for the fences. And we took some big risks, and a lot of them came off. And it's very encouraging when you do a job like mine. I mentioned Charlie's Angel. It's encouraging when I don't take risks and it doesn't work, and I do and it does. That makes all our jobs more fun.
By the way, never apologize for Charlie's Angels. Just the fact that you cast Minka Kelly, that's still fine in my book. But come on, people. I know it's early. What's interesting about your speech is it's a debate that actually a lot of us have been talking about for a while now, which is sort of straddling the line between smart, critically acclaimed, and at the same time broad and becoming a hit. And some of your competitors, not to name names, you guys can all kind of figure it out. Some of them have big hits that maybe aren't critically acclaimed. Others have critical acclaim, but don't really get the viewers. You've managed with shows like Once, with Revenge, with Modern Family, to sort of find a way to kind of straddle that line and master both. So is there a secret sauce? How do you sort of walk that fine line between critical acclaim and viewers?
I mean, I certainly don't think there's ever a secret sauce, and if you think there is, then at that point you're dead. I mean, you got to keep inventing yourself as much as you can. But I do think, I mean, the same is true of movies as it is, and that's kind of the theme of what I was saying there. Gone are the times where you can just have huge, great CGI effects on movies and people will turn up for the shock of the new. Avengers was written by Joss Whedon, incredibly smart writer, and I do think we're in a world now where our audience is Wikipedia-fueled and knows everything. We have an exchange that goes on where people predict which shows are going to do well. And literally it's just, I mean, people do this on the stock exchange, they do it on elections, and literally the audience, the general audience is saying which shows are going to work and not. They generally seem to pick better than the executives. In other words, they should be sitting here on this chair and I should not, because they're supremely well informed. I was talking yesterday to Bill Carter about Nashville, which is a fabulous new show we've got coming up. And our concern about that show before we started was, is it going to be pigeonholed as a little bit of a rural show? Because the truth is, it's supremely well done. It's got Connie Britton and Hayden Panettiere, and they're both really, I think, putting on performances of a lifetime. Look, we just announced it at the Upfront. We have not done maybe one 15-second spot in one basketball game. And yet there's a huge amount of conversation about this show and how smart and interesting it is. So I just think you're in a world where marketing plays an enormous part and a very important one, but the echo chamber beyond it really smells out the quality and the lack of quality. And there are some movies that could have launched before Rotten Tomatoes that have launched very nicely, but now we will go on there and say, well, the critics thought it was 22, and the audience thought it was 31, not sure I'm going to go. And so we get called on it because there's so much information out there, and I think that makes our game better.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're pretty much dead if an audience hasn't sampled a show by episode 6, even if the show gets better. There's much more pressure to open a show these days, and does that mean just you got to be better with marketing and sort of, how do you sort of adjust to this new reality?
I think it does. I mean, I came from cable. I was on British broadcast and then US cable for a time, and certainly you learn on cable you're in a fragmented world, and that you've got to punch out, you've got to throw the network at a show, it has to be distinctive, it has to have a hook. And I would argue that broadcast is in a fragmented world too. You can't launch a broadcast show just on your own airwaves anymore. You have to market it well. But that being said, there's nothing worse than good marketing for not a good show. You have to be able to deliver. And people will smell that way before you get there.
And yeah, your cable background obviously has helped you adjust to this new reality. I mean, talk about that sort of. What were some of the things that you brought to the network job that maybe you learned on the job in cable, and sort of talk maybe about that divide and sort of what's happening network versus cable these days?
Well, first of all, I think it's an incredibly healthy competition between broadcast and cable. You know, if you think about it, broadcast used to dominate, then pay cable came in, and this is a decade or so ago, you had Sex and the City and Sopranos coming in. That raised everybody's games. We did Lost and Desperate Housewives, and then basic cable got to the point where there was enough money there that you could make Mad Men and Breaking Bad. And if you look at the new crop of dramas across broadcast, you know, every bit as good as anything else there. So I think that dialogue that goes on between cable, both pay and basic, and broadcast is a very, very healthy one. You know, I think there are things that both sides can learn from each other. I certainly think marketing is an incredibly important point. I also think, you know, we're all in a fragmented world, and it's important for broadcast to have a brand. I don't know that I would have said that 5 years ago. I think we would have said that the only thing that mattered was the show that you put on the network. But the fact that, for instance, ABC over-delivers on upscale women means that a show like Revenge could really catch fire on this network, and I don't know if it would have caught fire on CBS. On the other hand, the brands that are broadcast are inclusive brands. In other words, if you're on Lifetime, you can or MTV, you can exclusively say, you know, I don't want older people, I don't want men. Whereas for us to work, where Once Upon a Time has worked so well, certainly it delivers to upscale women all the way across America and in big bulk, but it invites in all four quadrants, and we are an inclusive brand. We invite men in and younger and older viewers in a way that a cable network can really focus and not need to do that.
Yeah, was that something when you came to ABC? I mean, ABC had somewhat of a brand, but it does seem like the past 2 years, the kind of shows that you put on the air, you've really solidified what that brand is. And sort of describe what is that brand now?
Well, I think, you know, we were sort of hinting it there with that don't just watch when you can feel, because I think we deliver emotion when we do it right better than anybody else. And I think that's what I was trying to say out there, is that emotion is such a critical part of storytelling. And I like to call my brand Smart with Heart. And I get laughed at in the US because I can't pronounce smart or heart, as far as they're concerned. As far as I'm concerned, no Americans in the room can pronounce either of them.
But see, when you say it, we think you're smart, just by saying smart.
Yeah, so, yeah. I'm not, but we Brits get away with that.
You fool us well.
Yeah, the transatlantic accent that we sound like idiots back home. But isn't it wonderful that a Smart with Heart brand, you know, can be a big, broad, mainstream brand and deliver the #1 show, you know, in America. I was going to say in the world, but I'm sure there's a show in China that's, you know, bigger than Modern Family. But it's a very interesting moment when a scripted show that is, I would say high-low, because Steve Levitan and Chris Lloyd create a huge amount of broad comedy there. But it's a real thinking show too. It delivers both high and low. And that's the #1 show. It's the first time a scripted show has knocked Idol and reality off the #1 slot in, I think, 9 years.
Well, Modern Family is also a monster in DVR. It adds, what, about 4 million?
Absolutely.
5 million viewers a week just when you live plus 7.
And that's my point about appointment television. By the way, the point about appointment television is also a difference between broadcast and cable. Tom Zappler, who is in the room and used to build ABC Family with me, on a cable network, you know, you have a whole lot of syndication that you can fill your network with. You have second and third run movies, and then you create the cherry on the cake, which is your 1 or 2 or 3 originals. A broadcast network is really driven by its originals, and I think our brand, because it's a little younger than one of our key competitors, really leads on appointment television. I think that's one of the reasons why we've been so lucky this year.
Well, let's talk more about comedy, because that's been a hot topic. And, you know, obviously with Modern Family leading the way, you've been sort of, you know, leading this comedy resurgence that we've talked a lot about. And this year, you know, Happy Endings is really sort of coming to its own. And you have a new show in Suburgatory that is coming back for a sophomore year that did very well as well. You're a big fan of Don't Trust the Bee, I know. Sort of talk about where comedy is going now. And is this resurgence real? Is comedy back, or is it still tough?
Comedy is back. By the way, if this were England, it wouldn't be called Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23.
There you go. Standards difference. Yeah.
Standards difference between the different places. There's no question that comedy's back. there's always an ebb and flow between these different genres, and the big broadcast networks needs all three legs of the stool. You need reality, you need comedy, and you need drama, and you've seen how well we did on drama this year in particular. We're just seeing a little bit of an ebb going on the big reality shows. You're seeing definitely a flow coming in on the comedies. We thought this was kind of a joke and something we could sell at the upfront and let's see what happens, and it turned out to be correct. We have a big sort of social research unit, and we studied, this was at the beginning of last year's upfront, we studied what shows had worked in tough times. And we looked at the Depression, obviously, in the 30s, and we looked at the 70s. And it turned out that they were stories of anger and revenge, romances, sort of Fred Astaire type romances and musicals, sort of screwball comedies, fairy tales, and stories of monsters and demons. And so lo and behold, when you look at the big shows that work for us, they were comedies, stories of revenge, and fairy tales, which was kind of fascinating to see. But I do think, partly what happens is when the field lies fallow for a long time, it's very fertile for new ideas as they come in. And there was a decade there where the only guys holding on were kind of The American Office and 30 Rock. And then you got a big audience to come in with Modern Family. And that gave not just the writers, but the audience the idea that there really could be a reinvention of comedy. And it's not just floated back on the single camera, which we dominate, but CBS obviously dominate on the multi-cameras with Big Bang Theory. And that's just as strong a resurgence as we've had with single cameras. So comedy is back. I mean, look, there aren't enough comedy show writers to fill the huge amount of development that have happened this year. So there's a huge amount of competition to make sure that the next round are as quality controlled as the round we've launched this year. But certainly our audiences are fascinated by comedy, and I couldn't be more happy. I love comedy.
That's great. Well, let's talk about some of the other platforms out there and how it's kind of impacted your business. You mentioned some of them, but social media is obviously something that everyone's talking about right now. How's that kind of changed the game? Has that altered just how you develop, how you schedule, how you market? What's sort of the impact been so far? In
sort of changed everything. By the way, the England-France match may be on, so the England scores. Can someone just tell me?
Someone raise their hand.
Yeah, France not so much. I don't really want to know about it.
Then they should boo, right?
Yeah, right. But social media is sort of critical. I think what I was trying to allude to is that storytelling is still storytelling, but this changes the echo chamber around it, some of the stories that get told. We now have a dashboard. There used to be a time where you would just sit there and cross your fingers and look at your key art and think, that looks good, I hope it works. Whereas now, as we lead up to launch, our lives are almost like the guys who run social gaming. If you launch, a social game, and they have the tools to find out on an hourly basis, who's picking up, which pig and moving it to which field, and they can change those social games literally in real time as they go forward. Now that's not appropriate to the storytelling we do, because ours is lean back storytelling, and people don't want to interactively decide whether the evil queen wins or doesn't win. They want to be spun a story. Nevertheless, it gives us a huge amount of information as we approach the launch of a show. So we do an enormous amount of work. I think we have more Facebook fan pages than any other network. And we do a lot of work, and it has to be authentic. If people feel they're being marketed to, they don't want it. It has to be an authentic conversation. But we literally have a dashboard as you move towards a month, 3 weeks, a week towards a launch, where you can tell what whether your Google searches are now volcanic, what's the sort of tweeting storyline that's starting to come out, where is the Facebook. You have a dashboard of what is interesting and what isn't, and some of them can be misleading, because if you have a genre show which has a small, but passionate audience, that can mislead you into thinking, but it's a very interesting way to get a sense about whether a show is going to launch or not, and it's a very important way of driving buzz for that show.
Yeah, and sort of manage your marketing campaign, which is sort of fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, your other hat is the head of the studio.
Yeah.
We're looking at what Hulu and Netflix and a lot of these folks are doing with these platforms these days too. Do you see opportunity there? Do you see down the road producing for platforms like that, or?
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the there are two subjects that have gone on, I think, in the last couple of years, and one of them is the surprising resilience of broadcast with its multiple revenue streams. As online revenue streams come in, retrans comes in, authentication comes in. If you look at the studio side, we just have an expanding array of revenue streams as you come through that. So that one business that used to be reliant on maybe ads and international sales and a few domestic sales. International sales are now incredibly strong for us. Domestic sales for broadcast stay incredibly strong. It is not true that the new shows that have been developed for cable are now as valuable for second run on cable. But now we also, on our studio side, have new revenue streams and new platforms coming in online, and all that's incredibly useful. It's no longer the case that when we do a round of pilots and we then pass on those pilots, that those pilots are now passed on. Because there's a number of pilots that we can then place on cable. We'll have to reconstruct the show to make that work. That can have a life on Netflix, can have a life on Hulu, and even, of course, on pay cable, which has always been the case. So for the big, and there are 4 or 5, the big content engines in the US, there's nothing but growth in all those various different platforms, and it's not just Netflix in the US, it's Netflix and Hulu Plus all the way around the world.
Right, and let's talk a little bit more about international and sort of how that impacts decision-making these days, and how important is it in the whole process in developing shows and picking up shows and renewing shows?
I don't think that the way to sort of make something work internationally is to say, I've got to make a show that storyline works for India and then we place it in Vienna and Cairo. I mean, I think in the end, look, I was brought up on, Dallas. When I was a kid, we didn't matter that it was Dallas. In fact, we loved the fact that it was in Dallas. I probably emigrated because it was in, America. Nobody watches Downton Abbey and says, "Can we have a few, Americans, French?" Yeah, in the end, a story has to be in a world that you believe in, and it has to have a sense of internal grammar, and you have to care about that world and go for that world. And in the end, that's what stories should do. Nevertheless. More and more deals we're doing where we can get international buyers interested in the show. We have shows with co-productions. Ricky Blue is a show that we do up here. We're super proud of that show. It becomes a really good play for us every summer. And so we look at different models. The models where the US studios invest all the money and then look through their output deals with the successful shows to really sell in 200 countries around the world. And the ones that we retrofit through all sorts of creativity that comes out of Canada, comes out of London, comes out of Holland and other places. So there are two things happening. On the one hand, the American storytelling machine stays strong, and this is in a world where not all American export businesses are strong, and I sometimes think we don't get enough credit for that. But equally well, local storytelling, I've seen, has got stronger and stronger and stronger, and the ability to have European as well as North American format sales really sing and create billion-dollar businesses has become stronger and stronger and stronger. So the cross-pollination of stories across the world is certainly happening.
Let's talk more about next season. Give me an idea of sort of what the strategy was this year, what you were looking for, and what you're excited about going into fall.
Well, it's difficult to pick the children because
they're all hits right now.
They're all hits right now.
Best time of the year.
Yeah, I know, they're all massive hits. And certainly this year we had less needs than we had last year because we absolutely had a few holes on the network, and that allowed us to do Revenge and Once Upon a Time and a number of other ones. But we wanted to keep swinging for the fences and doing interesting big shows that you could only really make on a big broadcast American network. Last Resort is a great show by Sean Ryan. Mistresses was one of our highest testing shows of the year, just a really relatable show that's on brand for us. Nashville, I think, has probably got a huge amount of buzz. And rightly so, because I encourage everybody to watch that show. It's really well made.
Connie Britton, say no more.
Connie Britton is great. Callie Corey, who did Thelma and Louise, wrote the show. She's just such a smart writer. 666 Park Avenue, I mentioned about one of the genres that we didn't do last year, but there's certainly AMC and a number of other networks, and obviously the movies looked into was the stories of monsters and demons that have worked in difficult times. And 666 Park is a very ABC show. Like, it's a deeply soapy show with Terry Quinn and Vanessa Williams, but it's got a twist. Clearly, it's called 666 Park Avenue. about people who will sell anything to get their careers and live in a fantastic apartment block on the Upper East Side. And that's very special. I love a show called Neighbours, which is by Dan Fogelman, who did Crazy Stupid Love. And he's such a smart showrunner. He was in sort of specking out his whole season this week, and he's figured out exactly the season with that. That's the show where people move into a neighborhood and the neighbors turn out to be aliens. He described it to my marketing team as, look, it's no different from if you move into a neighborhood and the next door neighbor's a Brit.
What does that mean?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I'm the alien in this particular scenario.
What's interesting about your fall lineup too is there are a lot of people from the theatrical world, from the movie world. Right? You mentioned Calicori and others as well. And there's this ongoing debate: is TV better than movies? And without denigrating movies, this is a real golden age for television. And people are flocking to TV. Movie people who would have never done TV 10 years ago are doing broadcast network TV, not even just cable anymore.
Well, I think TV allows you to tell stories to different audiences. You can tell an 18 to 49 story, you can tell very mature stories, which is really the theory of that, so smart as the new mainstream. Although I have to say, if you think about this summer, Avengers, Joss Whedon, I was shocked to find out went to my rather bizarre British boarding school. He's a high-low guy. He's a very intellectual player who's very comfortable with comics. And there you've got an example of a very smart, big comic book franchise doing well on movies. And I do think on movies, sort of the shock of the new means that just having great CGI isn't enough. You've got to have the ideas behind that. And I think television is just really loving the notion that you have to have stories with ideas and meaning. And I think, the slowing of the DVD business, we've managed to replace with a number of other revenue streams. Netflix, you mentioned, international sales, retrans consent, our online revenue streams. So, it's great storytelling always flows where there is a lot of investment, right the way back through the centuries. And, there's great storytelling on television, and we have writers from features who love that idea. Plus, to some degree, it's a wonderful idea to be able to create a perfect 90-minute, masterwork. It's a great, Adam and Eddie, who do Once Upon a Time, they revel in the notion that they can tell storytelling that goes on and on and on. That's closer to sort of Charles Dickens than it is to a short story. And they get the chance to do that, and they get the chance to do that hopefully for many seasons to come.
Great, well, we will be watching. Paul Lee, thank you very much, and thanks for coming, everyone.